The lockdown.
Subscribe, like, comment.
Because once you step inside the story, there's no easy way out. The sirens were already fading when the first guard realized something was wrong. At 2:17 a.m., Goulburn Supermax, Australia's most feared prison, a concrete fortress built to erase men from the outside world, went into full lockdown. Steel doors slammed shut in sequence, echoing like gunshots through the corridors. Red emergency lights washed the walls in a dull, bleeding glow. Inside Unit D, the air felt wrong.
Too still.
Too quiet. They found the body in Exercise Yard 3. Senior Corrections Officer Mark Delaney stood frozen at the edge of the floodlights, his breath visible in the cold New South Wales night. The man on the ground was inmate Daniel Mercer, one of the most dangerous prisoners in the country. Former contract killer. Life sentence. No parole. Mercer lay on his back, eyes open, staring at nothing, his prison-issued shirt neatly folded beside him like someone had taken their time. No visible injuries. No blood. No signs of a struggle. And that terrified everyone. Because in Goulburn Supermax, nothing happened without cameras seeing it, guards knowing it, or someone paying for it. Yet somehow, one of the most closely monitored inmates in Australia had ended up dead in a locked yard that, according to the system, he was never scheduled to enter. Within minutes, police vehicles flooded the perimeter. Detective Inspector Rachel Kincaid arrived just before dawn, her jaw tight as she stepped through the Sally Port and into the prison's core. Kincaid had seen crime scenes across Sydney, gang executions, botched robberies, calculated murders, but this was different. This was a crime scene designed to be impossible. She crouched beside Mercer's body as forensic lights flickered on. "Cause of death?" she asked quietly. The medic shook his head. "No trauma. No ligature marks. Toxicology will take time." Kincaid looked up at the surrounding walls, 6 meters of reinforced concrete topped with razor wire and watchtowers. "Then how did he die?" No one answered. Daniel Mercer wasn't just another inmate. He was a liability. For years, he'd been rumored to know too much about organized crime figures, corrupt officials, deals that never made it into court records. He'd survived stabbings in other prisons, threats that would have broken lesser men. That survival was what got him sent to Goulburn, the prison Australia unofficially called its Alcatraz. Here, inmates were locked down 23 hours a day. Movements were tracked to the second. Conversations were monitored. Silence was enforced. And yet, Mercer had been talking. Kincaid learned that within the first hour of the investigation. A junior guard, pale and shaking, admitted Mercer had requested a meeting 2 days earlier. Said he had information. Said someone inside the prison was planning something big. He didn't say what. Kincaid pressed. The guard swallowed. He said it involved staff. That single word changed the tone of the room. By mid-morning, investigators began pulling surveillance logs. Camera feeds from Yard 3 showed nothing unusual. No other inmates. No guards entering or leaving during the time window. Even more disturbing, there was a 12-minute gap in the footage. Not a glitch. Not a power surge. A clean, deliberate absence. Someone had turned the cameras off. As the prison administration scrambled to contain panic, Kincaid began building a timeline. Mercer had been in his cell at 1:41 a.m. A routine check confirmed it. At 1:58 a.m., he was somehow in the yard. At 2:17 a.m., he was dead. 19 minutes. Enough time for a conversation. Enough time for a warning. Enough time for a deal or a betrayal. Then came the second blow. Forensics found a thin plastic strip hidden beneath Mercer's folded shirt. Not a weapon. Not contraband. Just a piece of laminated paper, trimmed down to the size of a finger. On it was a single word, written in block letters with a blunt object. Keystone. Kincaid felt a chill creep up her spine. It wasn't a name she recognized. But Mercer had left it where it would be found. Not hidden. Not destroyed. A message. As guards escorted inmates back into isolation and administrators assured the media it was a medical incident, Kincaid stood alone in the yard, staring at the concrete walls that had swallowed countless men and secrets. Someone inside Goulburn Supermax had silenced a man who was about to talk. And whatever keystone meant, it was powerful enough to kill for. But when Kincaid ordered a search of Mercer's cell later that afternoon, the officers stopped cold at the doorway. Because the wall behind his bed had been hollowed out, and the space inside was empty. The keystone theory. By nightfall, Goulburn Supermax no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a crime scene pretending to be one. Detective Inspector Rachel Kincaid stood inside Daniel Mercer's cell, staring at the hollowed-out concrete behind the bed frame. The edges were rough but deliberate, chipped away slowly over months, maybe years. This wasn't desperation. This was patience. Only staff would have noticed the dust, she said quietly. And only staff could have ignored it. The governor of the prison didn't respond.
He didn't have to.
The implication was already sinking in. Inside the wall cavity, investigators found traces of adhesive, faint smudges where something had been taped and removed. Whatever Mercer had been hiding, someone knew exactly where to find it and got there first. By the next morning, the investigation had split in two directions. One team chased the impossible logistics of Mercer's death. The other focused on the word he'd left behind.
Keystone.
At first glance, it meant nothing. No known gang. No inmate nickname. No operation on police databases. But Kincaid had learned long ago that criminals rarely choose random words. They choose symbols. Her breakthrough came from an unlikely place, Mercer's prison file. Buried in transfer records was a note from 7 years earlier, when Mercer had briefly been held in a remand facility outside Canberra. During intake, he'd shared a cell with a former infrastructure contractor convicted of fraud. That contractor's company name? Keystone Integrated Services. The firm no longer existed. It had dissolved quietly after winning multiple government contracts, security upgrades, surveillance installations, prison infrastructure, including Goulburn Supermax. Kincaid felt the shape of something ugly forming. She requested archived procurement files. What she got back was incomplete. Pages missing. Approval signatures redacted. But one thing was clear. Keystone Integrated Services had installed sections of Goulburn's internal surveillance system years before Mercer's death, including Yard 3, and including the cameras that went dark for 12 minutes. As pressure mounted, correction staff were interviewed one by one. Most were cooperative. Some were nervous. A few were angry. But one name kept resurfacing in whispers: Liam Hargreave. Hargreave wasn't a guard.
He was a senior systems technician.
15 years with corrections NSW. Trusted. Invisible. The kind of man who knew how the prison breathed, when doors unlocked, when cameras blinked, when alarms stayed silent. He worked the overnight shift last week, an internal report confirmed, including the night Mercer died. When officers went to bring Hargreave in for questioning, they found his workstation wiped clean. Logs deleted. Access records overwritten with false timestamps. That alone was enough to trigger a warrant. But before police could execute it, Hargreave disappeared. His car was found abandoned near Lake George, engine cold, phone smashed on the driver's seat. No blood. No body. Just absence. Inside the prison, panic spread fast. Inmates were locked down indefinitely. Guards began watching each other instead of the cells. Anonymous notes appeared in staff lockers. One simply read, "He wasn't the first." Kincaid barely slept. She replayed Mercer's last hours again and again. Why request a meeting? Why leave a word instead of a name? And why die without a mark on his body? The toxicology report arrived on the 4th day. Mercer had been poisoned. Not with something crude or fast-acting, but with a rare synthetic compound designed to mimic cardiac failure. It would pass undetected unless specifically tested for. The kind of substance used in intelligence operations, not prison hits. Someone had access. Someone had knowledge. And someone had a reason to make Mercer's death look natural. Kincaid ordered a deep dive into Mercer's communications. While his calls had been monitored, his written correspondence had been sporadic and unremarkable until 3 months before his death. That's when he began receiving legal mail from a small Sydney firm specializing in whistleblower protections. Mercer had been preparing to talk. Not about his crimes. About the prison. According to encrypted drafts recovered from the firm's server, Mercer claimed Goulburn Supermax was compromised at its core. That certain inmates were being allowed controlled movement in exchange for silence. That surveillance blind spots weren't bugs, they were features. And at the center of it all was a legacy contract signed years ago. A system designed with hidden access points. A keystone holding everything together. If Mercer exposed it, the fallout would be catastrophic. Careers destroyed. Charges filed. Institutions questioned. Kincaid realized then that Mercer wasn't silenced because of who he was. He was silenced because of who he could take down. As night fell on the fifth day, Kincaid received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was distorted, calm, and chillingly precise. "You're looking in the wrong place," it said. "Keystone isn't a company. It's a role." The line went dead. And at that exact moment, alarms began screaming inside Goulburn Supermax. Because one of the most secure wings in the prison had just lost power. And an inmate who was never supposed to leave his cell was gone. The man behind the walls. The power outage lasted 90 seconds. That was all it took. When emergency generators kicked in, Goulburn Supermax came back online piece by piece. Lights first, then doors, then cameras. But the damage was already done. Cell 7B, Omega Wing, stood open. Inside it, the bed was neatly made, personal items untouched, as if the inmate had simply stepped out for a moment. The missing man was Evan Calloway, former financial crimes investigator, convicted whistleblower, sentenced under sealed charges and transferred to Goulburn under a classification so high it barely existed on paper. Officially, Calloway was there for his own protection. Unofficially, he was there to be forgotten. Rachel Kincaid understood the truth instantly. Daniel Mercer hadn't been the story. He'd been the distraction. As tactical units swept the prison, Kincaid focused on what mattered: how Calloway vanished from a system designed to prevent exactly that. The answer came faster than she expected. A junior engineer, hands shaking, admitted the blackout wasn't a failure. It was a command, executed through an override protocol embedded deep inside the prison's infrastructure. A keystone. Not a person. Not a company. A master access role. Built years ago during construction, hidden beneath layers of compliance, designed to grant full control to a single authorized user in the event of national security contingencies. A back door no one talked about. A skeleton key to Australia's most secure prison. And someone had just used it. Kincaid traced the access signature to an internal terminal, one assigned to Liam Hargreave, the missing technician, the man who supposedly vanished by the lake. Only he hadn't disappeared. He'd been extracted. Calloway's importance became clear as sealed court documents were forced open. Years earlier, he'd uncovered a quiet arrangement between private contractors and government officials, security systems deliberately designed with exploitable blind spots, sold as cost-saving measures, then leveraged for influence. Prison placements altered. Surveillance feeds manipulated. Inmates silenced or protected depending on who they threatened. Goulburn wasn't just a prison. It was leverage. Mercer had discovered it from the inside. Calloway had documented it from the outside. Together, they formed a liability no system could tolerate. But Mercer talked too soon. Calloway waited. Kincaid followed the trail to a remote maintenance facility outside the prison perimeter, officially decommissioned. Inside, investigators found portable servers still warm, encrypted drives mid-wipe, and a single access badge left on a metal table. It belonged to someone no one expected. The Deputy Minister for Corrections. By dawn, the story broke. Quietly at first, then all at once. Emergency resignations. Internal reviews. No comment statements layered over panic. The Deputy Minister was taken into custody pending investigation, denying everything. Claiming he was being framed. Claiming he'd never heard of Keystone. But the data said otherwise. Emails recovered from Mercer's hidden wall cavity, copied and stored before his death, proved Mercer had been feeding information outward. The whistleblower firm hadn't just been protecting him. They'd been coordinating with Calloway. The final piece came 3 weeks later. Interpol flagged a secure data drop uploaded from an offshore server. It contained architectural schematics, access logs, names, dates, payments. Enough to trigger inquiries across 3 countries. Enough to collapse careers built over decades. At the bottom of the file was a short message. Keystone removed. Authorities declared the case closed. Officially, Daniel Mercer died of natural causes complicated by pre-existing conditions. Officially, Evan Calloway escaped with assistance and remained at large. Officially, no systemic corruption was proven, only administrative failures. Goulburn Supermax resumed operations.
The walls stayed standing.
But for Rachel Kincaid, the silence felt heavier than before. She visited the prison one last time before transferring off the case. Yard 3 had been scrubbed clean. Cameras replaced. Systems upgraded. Perfect again. Too perfect. As she turned to leave, a corrections officer she'd never met slipped something into her coat pocket. No eye contact. No words. Later, alone, Kincaid unfolded the paper. It was a visitor log, dated 2 days after Mercer's death. One name stood out, signed in under special authorization. Evan Calloway. Visiting Daniel Mercer. Kincaid stared at the page, the implications settling like ice in her chest. Mercer hadn't been silenced to protect the system. He'd been silenced because he refused to run. Calloway had walked out alive. And somewhere beyond the walls of Australia's Alcatraz, the keystone still existed, passed from hand to hand, waiting for the next lock worth opening. They said the prison held the worst men in the country. But the most dangerous ones never needed a cell. If this story got under your skin, you already know there are darker ones still waiting.